But I want to give Dr. Isabel Kane a chance to unpack some of your comments with her panel. It's a joy to introduce Isabel. I actually met you here at the Humanity 2.0 a few years ago, and then we've had a chance to collaborate over the last 3 years through her work at OECD in Paris. And she's really been one of the drivers and founders of a thing called the Blue Dot Network, which was an initiative she created with the Secretary of State in the United States and then multiple governments, Australia, Japan, et cetera, to think about infrastructure in a way that leads to human flourishing and leads to flourishing of the planet. And has rolled that out in multiple countries and had a big impact already and have been a participant in a lot of that work. She's had a chance to inform and advise the G7 and G20 in similar ways that Dennis is doing, and really comes from a background of anthropology. That's your focus in terms of your PhD, but also I think we've connected on coming from a rural perspective in Australia, kind of having a different experience in the World Economic Forum in Paris, et cetera, and then really having an engaged experience in Mongolia in a different culture and bringing that different cultural perspective. So excited to hear your comments and your interaction with our next panel.
Thank you, Ron. I may be the most confused person in the room by that description, or I've seen a lot and we're going to get this right. So thank you, Professor, for outlining what I would say is one of the best attempts to marry one of the longest standing debates potentially in Western philosophy, which is around the sort of communitarian versus atomistic notions of how we approach the individual, how we approach cooperation, and how we approach justice. I was reflecting on why Ron asked me to moderate this panel, and I think it's because I tend to get things done. I'm asked to do difficult things and to bring people together to try and do it in a fair and just way. And so I was thinking about this, and I thought, there's a lot of biases that have been brought into the conversation, that there isn't the expectation that government should work a certain way, an expectation that business should, an expectation that civil society should. There's biases that we're coding into the technologies which are disrupting the way we work. And I wanted to bring to the fore my biases in this, because I know that it's impacting and influencing the way that I direct this panel and our reaction to the professor. So I was talking about it with my dear new friend here, just to sort of say, look, we need to look at how do we galvanise, how do we have a systems change. We've got all of these issues, and very subtly and very eloquently, as the psychologist would, he said, yes, but maybe the problem is that we are looking to galvanise, and these short-term kind of actions are part of the problem. So he's sort of gently said, let's also look at the long-term impacts and the long-term changes that we need to make. And I don't know if you wanted to put any colour on what I've just said there, because it's going to play into how we react to the professor.
Thanks, Isabel. I mean, really, it's just to emphasize what I think has begun to emerge as a topic, particularly in this last panel, and with some of the things that Professor Snowden said in terms of time and temporality and what do we focus on. I know Mila talked about the 7th generation, right? And it's very easy to get caught up in these systems that reward last-minute solving the problem, burning platforms kinds of things. And we get involved in these cycles, right? And you actually get rewarded for, I mean, if you're a fire department that is, let's imagine a for-profit fire department that gets paid for putting out fires, then you don't want to have safety codes. You want to have lots of fires breaking out. You can come in and put out the fires, and you get rewarded for that. And we kind of have systems, I think, that bring this material gain by encouraging us to focus on short-term kinds of things. So instead, by looking at the long term, we can have a better flourishing outcome.
Exactly. And so in order to reflect your quest of humanity, we thought in our panel reactions now we will also use this sort of disruptor and look at both the long-term changes that need to be in place, but also the short-term actions that are required by different stakeholders to start disrupting the system. So maybe I'll quickly introduce my amazing panelists who are both welcome to react to either my question or to the professor's framework. We have John Havens, the Sustainability Practice Lead from the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. That is a mouthful. Andre Laborde, who's sitting behind him, he's the President of Vena Capital. We also have Letty Garcia, the Associate Director of Leadership Initiative at Harvard Business School. And finally, we have John Levy, the Managing Director of Franklin Templeton. So very fortuitously, or by design, we have a number of different stakeholders. And I wanted to start with, please.
Could I become part of?
Yes, you can. Absolutely, it would be a privilege. Okay, and then the third speaker we have is Dennis Noah, who will also join the conversation. So I would invite you to jump in as you both go, but my sort of first question, I guess, was to John, given that you've done a number you've worked extensively on different metrics in AI ethics and sustainability metrics. What is the potential, what is the vision that you see of business being able to adapt to a sort of systems change or a shareholder, going beyond a shareholder model in business, particularly technological businesses, which obviously profit off potentially having a strong focus on AI? I'll start with you.
Thank you. I'll take half an hour to respond. I'm kidding. I'm looking at Matt because I'm like, I talk too long. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be on the panel. Dennis, thank you so much for your opening provocation or thought. I think I'm going to try to answer your question, but in a different way. I've been thinking about this phrase a lot. It's one of the hardest 5 words I know that people, at least in the West, I'm being general about the West, to say, which is, I am worthy of love. And so when you talk about what is worth, and then you talk about what is measured, and then you talk about what's not measured, unless you know about natural capital accounting, or if you aren't familiar with Montreal, Canada, the COP22 talked about biodiversity, then businesses, for instance, won't be tasked with knowing what the metrics are to prioritize sustainability. So I'm going to build off of what I think Dennis said, but say what I've learned and believe at my work with IEEE, and I led our largest AI ethics work for about 5 or 6 years, is when a business person will say to me, how do I make sustainability work for my business? I usually try to hear that well and with kindness respond back to some of the amazing, and by the way, for me, every person that just spoke on that past panel was like a mic drop. So thank you so much for all your perspective. The question is rather, if we want to maintain for 7 generations or longer, how can businesses work in conjunction with policy and individuals globally to ask how to do that? And quickly, I'll wrap up here with saying there's a key methodology a lot of people don't know about. We named our most recent paper, it's called Strong Sustainability by Design, on a concept, which is ESG. If you picture 3 concentric circles, there's this logic. If we pick the right metrics, this GHG protocol for scope 3, and then for business, we can report back to our investors, single materiality, double materiality, whatever. The thing is, then you're still picking something besides the ultimate, which is strong sustainability as a methodology, put E in the middle, economics, then above that, culture, but then above all of that is the planet and biodiversity. So since 1970, over 69% of all species have left the Earth. That's according to the World Wildlife Foundation. We can talk about anything, and we can talk about prioritizing whatever we want, but if we don't prioritize at the outset of policy and technological design, biodiversity, not just climate, and by that meaning prioritize saying, how do we maintain the Earth for 7 generations and what is human flourishing, we will prioritize something else. And when we don't have metrics to name those things, the status quo thing that is replacing it is GDP. Because by the way, if we don't give our businesses something besides the legal structure of shareholder growth, then we won't be opening what those things are. But the final thing I'll say here is we have to prioritize these things with our metrics first, or to say we want to move 7 generations is really not realistic. If you listen to the climate scientists that were just interviewed in The Guardian last week, over 2,000 climate scientists, a majority of them said, we have way past 1.5, and we are immediately in the place. It's not doom, it's science. The plastics in the ocean, et cetera. So the metrics that are joyful are the ones where we say, look what we haven't measured yet. Look at the opportunity and the need to prioritize those metrics.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess this is very clear, right? That there's a sense within the room and within the community and within nations and within the world that this needs to shift. But I would say over the last decade, it's not shifting as fast as the climate is. So maybe I can turn to you, Andre. You work in the finance industry, and you've seen the impact that technology has had. And I guess technology is often looked at as something that could expedite this change to the better, as the conversation this morning was about, or it could take us into a doom perspective. So maybe you could share some of your insights and some of the reactions within the finance industry to the evolution of tech, and is that taking us towards John's vision of post-shareholder based society or not? And you've got 3 minutes. No?
Thank you, Isabel. Yes. Earlier this morning, Matthew was talking about AI and talking about boom or bust. Well, there's an economist that I thoroughly tried to read up as much as I could on, and a lot of us know the term, there's no free lunch. Well, that was termed by Milton Friedman. And what he meant was there's a cost for everything. And how many of us go to a restaurant and we enjoy looking at the left-hand side of a menu? Why? Because that's the good part, the left-hand side. But what's on the right-hand side? The cost. And many times we walk out of the restaurant going, that was a great meal worth every penny. And there have been also times we've walked out of a restaurant going, that wasn't worth the cost. And that's sometimes how I look at maybe AI is, because if it'll be worthwhile. In my kind of business, I run a hedge fund. Well, in stocks are traded. I mean, I remember there was a time if you bought 100 shares of stock, it would cost you $30, $35 of commission. If you bought 1,000, you would add a zero behind that 30. It cost so much. And then it got to be through technology. If you bought 1 share or 10,000 shares, it would be $25. Flat fee, 25. And then it got to be $8, whether you bought 1 share or 10,000 shares. Today, you can buy 10,000 shares of a stock, and the cost is zero. There's no charge. Well, there is a cost, and it's called HFT, high-frequency trading. And basically all that means is that there is somebody on the back end that in a nanosecond, when you push the sell, if you want to buy Microsoft, from the moment you say, I want to buy Microsoft at this price, within a nanosecond, there's companies on the other side that is making a trade before that. Now, the good news is that there's no commissions. It's free. But there's a cost because somebody else is making 1/8 of a cent off of it, or even less, from that area. So are we willing to pay the price of this? And just yesterday, the first quarter earnings were released of a company called NVIDIA. Now, whether we talked this morning, we were talking about Microsoft, we were talking about Facebook, Meta is putting in billions of dollars of research. Well, something that every company that's putting all their billions of dollars of research in, you need a company called NVIDIA, this chip. Okay, so their stock is gone way high. In fact, they've just announced last night a 10-for-1 split. Well, that's good. But at the same time, is it worth the cost of, if whoever's in charge of making sure that AI is good, if Father Philip this morning talked about Sam Altman with OpenAI. Well, half of OpenAI is for public good. The other half Microsoft bought, and it's going to be for profit. So is the half for nonprofit the good part, and the other half? In my area of Benna Capital, I'm also investing in the Microsoft portion because I'm also looking at the capitalist way. Just last week, there was a gentleman that died, Jim Simons. And this is, the old saying that nothing is new, everything's kind of always just continued. In the 1990s, he was a professor of mathematics at Stony Brook College in California. And he was a head of mathematics. In fact, he had a saying that, what's the difference between a PhD in mathematics and a large pizza? And he said, you can feed a family of 4 with a large pizza. Well, he left teaching at mathematics, and he developed an algorithm of a company that he called Renaissance that made trades that would do 40,000 trades in the morning and 40,000 trades in the evening. Took the emotions out of it. Okay, and they were doing very, very well. In fact, they did so well that they had to close the fund to outside investors. It was so well. But is that good or is that bad? It's like we talked about before. Well, Jim Simons, who just, like I said, passed away last week, what he did was he gave millions of dollars to charities and to nonprofit organizations. I was talking to a new friend of mine this morning, and he was talking about how John Templeton, before he died, who had the Templeton funds, was funding many great organizations through the money, through the billions of dollars that he made. He set up. So that is good. So it's in the hands of those who are in charge of what you do. So AI, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm very optimistic because I think that in the hands of good, it's going to be an excellent, from medicine through education, investing, and through other areas. But if we keep our values and we keep our feet on the ground, and even though our heads are in the clouds, then we know that it's for good. Hopefully that cost for a free lunch will be worthwhile. So, my thoughts.
Andre, and it sounds like the financial industry is both out of balance, but also starting to correct itself in some ways in terms of I guess, using AI for the good, but also it seems that the human is the one that's, I guess, investing in the charities and in other spaces that are kind of correcting maybe some of the misalignment. But John, I know you work in impact investing, and this is one of the areas that has come up significantly in terms of the hope of many. The Ford Foundation lady earlier had spoken about how they're investing obviously through philanthropy, but in my area where you work in human rights or anti-corruption, the last line of defence nearly, if governments can't move the needle, is we'll get the investors to make sure the companies do the right thing. So how is I guess, impact investing moving towards the professor's vision in some way?
Thanks, and thanks. It's such an honor to speak here today, and today has been really a master class in real deep thinking on human flourishing. I have a lot to take away, to contemplate, and to hopefully take action both in my professional and personal lives. So I really appreciate that. I personally, I really dislike binary thinking, and I would imagine a lot of people here would agree with that. We talk a lot about good versus bad, right versus wrong, left versus right. And I think there's so many examples where it's just not that simple. We've been talking about the inevitable progress of AI, but it seems like there's also this theme that we need to progress our analog lives in parallel. It's not analog or digital, it's perhaps both. It's about enhancing our proximate relationships to hopefully find fulfillment in some areas through that traditional route, while also augmenting on the digital side. I also think about that in terms of the markets. Markets are built to be focused on profit, not on good. I do not believe that is a necessary truth. Markets right now are not intentionally good, nor are they intentionally bad. They're agnostic to the greater influence of capital and myopically focused just on the financial. However, there is if we intentionally focus on good, we can find financial value. And I get really excited about that because the word greed, for instance, is universally considered a negative term. But imagine if you can create scenarios and systems in place where greed puts capital into things that create better outcomes for people and the planet. I truly believe there are many of those opportunities, and that only comes from when different parts of society escape their siloed existence. So the markets, of course, need to focus on fiduciary duty and providing attractive returns. We don't need to abandon that at all, but we can enhance it by expanding the term of fiduciary duty to mean, what does that mean for broader society and the planet? In my day job, I run what we call a dual return strategy. So we need to return just as much as a regular investment fund. That's really important because that's how we create scalability and attract investors. But we also have a measurable return to local communities and the environment. We're able to do that because there's both explicit and intrinsic value in good. We know there are markets. We know that if you make a building more energy efficient, you can lower your OpEx. If you get a certain LEED certification, you can increase the value. But we also know that there's intrinsic value in a care home that provides better service for its users and patients than one that provides a lesser service. We also live in a world where there's an unfortunate truth that investments that do good have very, very large addressable markets. The world's problems are arguably getting worse, not better. We look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and if you think purely from a capitalistic perspective, you should see opportunity to address these issues. Other than that, I think just one quick thing, our hindrances. I do think coming in from the US, most of my work is in Europe because it's not a political topic, and political discourse is not really helping us achieve this. And I think the second you talk about combining good with fiduciary duty, you get accused of being on a political spectrum, which is something we don't want to do. But beyond that, I think it's education and information. There's a lot of groups trying to do good or trying to pretend to do good. We call it greenwashing, SDG washing, whatever you would call it. And I think we just need more education to help unlock the power of the capital market.
I'd be interested in maybe circling back or going to the professor, or Letty may have a point on this, on how you scale this beyond just a particularly socially conscious or socially driven company, which I think is also probably a bit of an ignorant statement, because I do believe that businesses are more and more aware that doing good is good for business. And that's certainly true, but I do also think that the scale back due to some leaders in the finance or the investor space, because of the politicization of this issue, particularly in the US, is having ramifications all around the world. And also maybe interestingly, we could say that the pushback from the EU and their recent shifts in the regulatory space are a way to define themselves against that as a potential competitive advantage, but that's slightly another issue. But I think the idea of scale and the idea of leadership in systems change is really interesting. And Letty, I know that you're one of the experts on organizational behavioral organizational ethics. Oh, no, we talked about this, and I knew I was going to get the words wrong. And around leadership development. What do you think some of the core characteristics or trends that you've seen that allow that type of balance between, business drivers and ESG type incentives that allow leaders to create a culture like that where people can act on both of those areas, if I may?
Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to build on what John and both Johns have said. I love the concept of the both and thinking to move things forward, because I think in the short term, we get stuck. We loop, I call it looping. We get stuck into there's only one way to think about a problem. And when we think about leadership, and I'm in the space of leadership development, at the moment, we are definitely challenged around the topic of digital transformation. So we gather people at the business school in groups such as this, and we keep looping around, well, how are we going to make a profit? But I think, thank you, Dennis, for your comments, because I think that's pushing us to think in the longer term. So in the short term, though, one of the things that I've learned today is the ability to think about the collective genius, and then how do we scale that genius? Because there is genius in the room, there's genius in the organizations, but how do you scale that? And I think that's where leaders are kind of getting stuck. So we measure what we care about. So the other thing is measurement. When we think about the shorter term, we're always thinking about the day-to-day, what's in the next queue, what's going to happen in the next year. But I think where leaders get stuck is a longer term. And then how do we help leaders think about the longer term? So if we do speak about how do you scale and how do you think about, I love the framework that we have here. And I think my question is around how do we develop a pedagogy around flourishing? Because I love this concept and what you've shared with us today, Matthew. And my question is, what's the pedagogy around? So I'm in education, so how do I bring this back to the classroom and help leaders think through, you know, how to actually use and apply this, take it back to the organization, speak to their boards, because that's very important. So if we think about the leader, then you have to think about the governance, right? Board governance. How do we bring those questions into the rooms and where we don't have those questions? It's usually what's the leader going to do? What's the senior management going to do? So I think we have to take us one step further and not just leave it at the leader level, but also go to the boards. It will, I don't want to call it the trickle-down economy, but I think it has to go, we have to shift the paradigm and also and engage at all levels. Because if we just get stuck sort of at the senior level, then we're going back to this, it's that person's responsibility to think about this. And I think what Dennis is pointing to in his comments is that we really have to be holistic about who is in the room, who's engaged in these conversations, because it's going to be the collective genius that's going to help us solve some of these problems instead of just the senior leaders. Thanks.
And that's a really good point. And I don't know if we've touched on it as much today around whose role it is in terms of mobilizing the middle and setting the tone from the top. But this idea of collective genius is fantastic. So Dennis, have you got your answers yet? You've had feedback from the organizational level, the regional, the sectorial, around how we may start to, I guess, have systems change. And maybe I could be facetious enough to ask you then what you think some of to react to the panel, but also what are some of the short-term or long-term necessities that you think are required by the likes of business and academia to move the needle?
Wonderful. Let me address exactly that. I think one thing in order to get the ball rolling is to understand that in general, what's good, doing good is not automatically good for business. It just isn't. And it's not, and even if we were able to induce business to think in the long run, which is difficult under the current system where short-term shareholder value plays a role, even then it would not automatically be good for business. And even if we allowed the collective genius to manifest itself, we'd still not be there, because the rules of the game mobilize against it. If we're totally honest with ourselves, business sometimes has a fiduciary duty to destroy the environment and to undermine society. If there's money to be made in those ways, as you said, John, markets are agnostic. And so our job should be to change the system, redirect gain. And that, as I said, can be done through tax subsidy incentives, regulations, laws, government procurement conditions, license to operate, change the nature of fiduciary duties, and so on. All of that is in the card. And keep in mind the need, when we have global challenges like climate change and biodiversity loss, to have a common goal that has to be reached globally, but distinctive pathways to get there, because countries have different political, economic, social circumstances. And in order for these distinctive pathways to add up to the common goal, one of the first things that we need is measurement. Measure what you treasure, which is what Gabriel Ramos likes to say at the UNESCO. And the interesting thing is now we have a unique opportunity, because given the political, social, economic, environmental pressures that we're facing, there's a big appetite, I see, among G20 policy leaders, G7 policy leaders, to embrace precisely that. And the proposal to measure SAGE for the G20 countries was listed as one of the 20 best ideas to come out of the Indian G20 presidency, and it's being taken over by the Brazilian. So simply measuring is a first step, and then the next step is accounting and reporting on the basis of that. And then, even then, you're not home, because you need to change the system so that basically it is profitable for business to do good. And that is a challenge for policymakers, which policymakers alone cannot manage. They can only manage it in collaboration with business. So in Global Solutions Initiative, we put together round tables where we ask senior policymakers and business leaders, how must the rules of the game be changed, for example, so that it is impossible to profit from destruction of the climate? It's a good question. And if we manage that, then the next step goes up. I advised Olaf Scholz on the climate club that came out of the G7. And there the idea is you need this common goal, distinctive pathways, and then you need rules that establish a level playing field for business. You don't want people to gain a competitive advantage from flouting the rules. And in order to get that going, you need measurement again. And the measurement needs to feed into the rest of the system. So I'm just absolutely delighted that we are bringing this Harvard-Oxford collaboration together on measurement and interacting with people on the policy front and on the accounting and reporting front in order to provide the enablers for such systemic change. Oh, could I just say one other? Okay, sorry. No, forget it.
Fine. So okay, maybe 1 minute quickly, John, and then 1 more minute, and then we'll wrap up.
Clear, technology does not live in isolation. All of IEEE's work is with standards. Standards are a way that people try to come together in consensus, and it's what's called soft policy. I want to be clear that we use terms like good and bad and AI, and especially the philosophers like me in the room, you just can't, that doesn't pass muster. Water is not being measured accurately at data centers. Data centers are the heart of how computers drive AI, period. If you look at the place called Uptime Institute, they measure data centers. They interview 800 different data centers. 2 years ago, they said, how much water are you using? They said, we're pretty sure it's about 39%. Moving forward in isolation of data is not responsible. I would call it morally evil. More importantly for business, not to make business or anyone else feel bad, if you don't know how much water is there, you can't say that you're building anything that's good or bad. You're saying we're building in ignorance. So measuring the planetary ecosystems is beyond necessary if there's anything of reality we want to deal with. And if we keep using terms like good or bad as a distraction, measure the water, measure the biodiversity, give the necessary physics level gift to the business world of saying, by the way, last thing I'll say here is if you want to talk about climate change, the reinsurance industry will not give insurance for climate change anymore. Why? Because they say the metrics for business, we won't cover you anymore.
Just one final note of clarification, which is, what are these drivers of flourishing? And the answer is they are the package of things that you need in order to succeed. So SAGE are human needs. So the need, solidarity, agency, gain, and environment are the need for belonging and solidarity, empowerment for agency, gain is consumption, and environment is sustainability. But they're also abilities, pro-sociality, niche construction for agency, sustenance for gain, regeneration for the environment, and they correspond to universal value, solidarity, care, agency is liberty, gain is utility, environment, stewardship. And all cultures can tie into that. And so if we have a package that covers needs, abilities, and values, then it is easy to generate the philosophies, communitarianism, classical liberalism, materialistic utilitarianism, environmental ecoethic. And that package is what drives us forwards. And so when we measure these individual things, we're actually measuring that package that will drive us into the future.
And potentially implement the flourishing and SAGE frameworks. So thank you to the panel and to the professor for sharing your ideas. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. And I just wanted one little thing to add that is happening in the next few months is within that collaboration between Harvard and Oxford, Dennis has brought to the table Colin Mayer, who's one of the distinguished professors in finance in the world, who's really trying to boil this down into what would a CFO think about that is the fewest most important things to focus on. And we won't go into detail on that. We have an opportunity to do that tomorrow, but it really gets to these ideas of social capital, which is about social trust, natural capital, which, what are the basic things we need, water, air, et cetera. So we're starting to make that shift into the practical and really trying to build on what we discussed earlier today, staying in the theme of AI and emerging tech, aligning that to flourishing, to thinking about it in the context of economy and business. And we have 3 workshops we're going to do tomorrow. What we do with the Humanity 2.0 Forum is we have, first day is soaking in lots of content, and your brains are probably overloaded. We'll do some reflective activities tonight and tomorrow morning, but tomorrow is a chance to put that into action and start to brainstorm ideas for collective action between now and the next forum. That's what created the quantitative and qualitative working groups in the last forum, so we're seeing the fruit of that today. We're shifting into the practical, and I'll start. We've got 3 workshops. There's workshop descriptions that you can grab on your way out. We'll do a poll tomorrow morning on which one you want to join. You get to choose. There may be one workshop which has 0 people in it, and that's data for us to say, okay, well, the group doesn't really want to focus on that topic. Maybe there's all 3 are fully built out. But the purpose of these 3 workshops, one is about using AI to advance our understanding of human flourishing. So we have the framework, we have sources of data, we have some great technologists in the room that are thinking about how to use data to help map flourishing, very complex problems we're dealing with, and technology could be helpful in that. Within that topic, we'll talk about some of the questions that the Vatican has around consciousness and AI, if we have time for that. But really thinking about AI and flourishing is the first group. The second group is about building a method to map and triage impediments to flourishing with a real deep consideration around how do we engage a wider set of voices and the we in this conversation, really expanding that we to a much, much larger group and a more diverse group. And the third is about really taking this conversation we've been in to the next level and more specificity about what we're going to do in the next 12 months, which is harnessing business to remove impediments to flourishing. So how do we take this conversation we've had and workshop that into specific recommendations for a committee to advance forward? Committees will be designed after the event based on feedback with the church and with other advisors and partners that we're working with. But tomorrow really sets the foundation for that collective action for the next coming year. So before we break, I just want to give James, would you just have another quick commercial about our exercise tonight, and then we'll turn it back to Matthew for the final logistics for our time and dinner.
A very full and very enriching day, and would like to have a kind of way of processing and being in an aesthetic practice that allows us to be calm, meditative, allow for some of those things to bubble up and process Then I invite you to join us. I think, Giuseppe, we're going to leave, we're just going to walk over, I think, the Palazzo from here. And we'll spend some time in some slow looking, which is kind of meditative, allowing you to choose a work of art that resonates with you based on what we've talked about here, and then just see what comes up. And then at the end, we'll have a bit of a debrief to chat with each other. We'll already be located right where the reception is going to start. So it'll be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you all again for your patience and your fortitude. Really appreciate it. I look forward to the follow-up conversations. I haven't had a chance to talk to many of you, so I'm looking forward to at the reception to take advantage of the opportunity. So again, just make sure you take one of these on your way out and read through them. There's a bit more detail about the panels. And again, there's absolutely no pressure. Pick the panel that you think will be most rewarding and that you'd likely want to collaborate in going forward. And if one of the panels is too light, we'll probably fold it up in for the others. Finally, just again, a reminder that there's Mass tomorrow morning for those who are interested. And for those of you, I highly encourage you to take advantage of James' generous offer. But if for those of you who would rather not, there will be a tour of St. Peter's Basilica. We'll be heading up from here and going in the back entrance. And Father Gene Gove will be leading that tour. And that's it. I think you all should have the address for the dinner venue tonight. If you don't, just let Giuseppe and I know, and we'll see you tonight at 6:30. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yes, they'll leave now. Yeah. Thank you very much.